Welcome to Our Story Matters. Cascade is more complete with you here. Your voice, your story, and your experience. We want to create safety, curiosity, and connectedness through these interviews. And I want to have some fun with this. And Hanna here with me does as well. Right? Yes.
We can't wait.
We can't wait. We are so excited. Hanna and I, this is our first interview, our first Our Story Matters. And Hanna and I will be hosting these. And we decided, let's swap. I'll interview Hanna, and then she's going to interview me. And we are truly, really excited about doing this. And there will be many of you that will be being interviewed as well, because your story matters. All of our stories matter.
We want to hear your stories.
We so want to. Absolutely. So today I have with me Hanna Lederer. This girl, I'm so excited. She is a delightful human who I've liked since day one. And she is a mover and a shaker. I keep finding out things about Hanna, like, oh, you don't only preach, you're on the board here and you're doing this. And, you know.
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions and thoughts and questions, and that usually gets me on certain groups and,
yes. And maybe like me, my opinions get me in certain, let's call them situations sometimes as well, right? Oh, I love that. No, I'm so thrilled. And Hanna, you and I, like I say, I've been a fan of yours since day one, but we haven't often got to sit down, and we've worked on stuff, but we haven't got to sit down and talk about some of our past stories. And that just makes me super happy. So with that, let's go ahead. Hanna, I would love to start today with you kind of giving a bird's eye view of kind of who you are, where you're at, what your life looks like.
Yeah, I would love to. Hello, everyone. I was born and raised in the southern part of Germany, in a small village of 200 people. And a random fact about me is that I actually wasn't even born in a hospital. And I had never been a patient in a hospital until I was 24 years old, visiting the United States for the first time ever, and had emergency surgery in Houston, Texas. So that was a random way to get introduced to the United States, let me tell you.
Exactly. And so you have never been a patient in a German hospital?
No, I've never, to this day. So Crazy. Let's hope it also never happens. I have a lot of respect for people working in a hospital. Anyway, family of origin. I am one of 4 siblings, 2 older sisters, me and my sister, and then 2 brothers. And I think a unique fact about my family that has very influenced us growing up, or to this day, is my oldest sister has special needs and is sitting in a wheelchair. So kind of all my childhood memories and playing as kids is kind of like always there's a wheelchair, or like my sister in a wheelchair part of it. So that's been special and actually very a great way to grow up, honestly.
How did it shape you, Hanna? That's a really, really significant piece of your story.
I think it was later in life, especially during college, when the first time really moving away from home and processing a lot about my upbringing and comparing it to similar, friends my age that back then, and realizing how much of a social capacity I've learned and gotten to know just through, just being intuitive and empathetic, like seeing people's needs. Like, so I think when you have someone with a wheelchair, like alongside you, like even if you, go out in town shopping, running errands, you always kind of think ahead. You're like, where are the stairs? Where is this? Like, can we even access this building? And I think to this day, I walk into a room and I see people who might need, more help or are on the margin. And I kind of like immediately start thinking like, how do we make this accessible, and how do we help?
Yes.
So it made me very aware of who are the weakest people in their group, and how can we help?
Right. Who are coming with very specific needs, and that maybe a lot of us would gloss over, and you're like immediately tuned in because your brain is used to thinking like that.
Exactly. And how much I'm also like I'm very naturally a spokesperson for my sister.
Oh.
And for those, and then extensively for other people, because it's so like I was, 9, 10, 11 years old, and my mom would be like, hey, I'm going to run quickly into the store. Why don't you guys go and buy yourself something over there in the bakery or whatever? And then I would 10-year-old me would push a wheelchair, like, and I think that they were like interacting with adults and saying like, excuse me, can you help me? Can you help us up the stairs? And so I think it just gave me, I mean, I didn't feel, as a kid, it's normal. And then later you realize like, wow, I'm very, I don't want to use the word blessed because I think it's overused, but I think it was a great additional gift in my life. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, wow. What a wonderful slice of your story. And I can see how it's created you to be you.
Thank you. Yeah. I think it's this interesting pieces. I think that's, when you and I started talking about this whole concept of our story matters, I think that's whole, experience with my sister is one of the many pieces in my life that will forever shape me who I am. And there were also challenges in it because we were, sometimes, I mean, regularly as kids, we got to hear like, hey, sorry, we cannot do that because your sister's sitting in a wheelchair, or like, I mean, we never were a family who went skiing or camping or so, because how would you go camping with someone in a wheelchair and stuff like that. But there were, I mean, I don't know, I worked through it. And
and there were gifts in it. There were gifts given to you. Right. I love that.
And she is to this day my biggest fan. Like in, again, where it's a lot of like, I mean, someone with special needs, also there is a lot of additional help it needs. And I think it will, but my family, for example, also ate dinner together until she moved out when she was like in her mid-20s. And so I think that was like realizing other families kind of, it stopped usually like when they were all teenagers and everyone was busy and running off. But because my sister needed help, you need to cut her food and kind of assist her. We would just have this standing dinner every night, like where whoever was home would sit together and eat with her. So yeah, anyway, that's a little snippet from my life.
Yes. Is there anything you want to focus on in terms of your story? I mean, there's so many things. We know that you moved here from Germany. Actually, what age? How old were you when you came here to the United States?
I moved here 8 years ago.
8 years.
2012.
Okay.
And I think as as we were preparing for it, and it's like, I mean, such a, I could talk about anything and like what part of your story you want to share. I think what I want to zoom on that I've been processing and thinking about a lot these last few months is when I was 21, actually, my first time moving abroad in a non-German speaking country, like, I mean, going off by myself into a country where I would need to speak English, was actually moving to Israel and volunteering there, like being there as a volunteer for 3 months. And I would love to kind of like share more about that.
I would love to hear it. My first thought is what provoked this idea to go to Israel.
Well, I finished high school truly not knowing what I wanted to do, like what kind of university, college education to pursue. But it was also very clear, I'm not just gonna, like a lot of people were like, just start something, like just go to college and then you will figure it out alongside it. And I was always very like, no. And I actually ended up doing 2 years of a lot of random things, like, internships and volunteering with organizations and just trying to like get as much exposure to different experiences. And that was, I would highly recommend it, honestly. I would so recommend, I mean, today I'm like looking at these young high school seniors and I'm like, go and like travel and see places. And one of those parts was actually ending up going to, I think in all these like 2 years of gap year, like I did a lot of different things. I saw a lot of different, got a lot of different insights in groups and organizations and businesses and whatever. But in those times, I also was very clear, I'm going to stick in Germany, or I'm going to stay in the German speaking world because I'm not good in speaking English. Like English was my worst grade in school and I felt very insecure in it.
Wow. That's crazy.
But I also realized then after, doing this whole like different internships and also so on, I realized it was holding me back. Like all it really was is like my fear and my insecurities and my not knowing what it would be like was holding me back to actually pursue the next step to go into an English speaking country and just overcome this language barrier.
Okay.
And I think I ended up then at some point to say, I'm going to jump in. I'm just going to do it. 3 months. Okay. Where can I get in? And that fact about me actually has been kind of kept going through my whole life. Like every time I kind of sense like the only thing that's holding me back here is fear or insecurities. Like this is, and then I'm not, then I'm kind of like trying to push through and keep finding the courage and taking one step at a time.
Wow.
Because it's never supposed to hold me back again. And I think that was one of my first big experiences of that. So anyway, so I ended up volunteering with a German organization that is sending young Christian Germans to Israel in a partnership program, and those Christian Germans like me are then located in different locations, or located in different organizations and Jewish organizations that are serving the elderly, that are serving people with special needs, that are serving people on the margin. So I was located in the northern part of Israel in a kibbutz, which is a village kind of community, Jewish community. And I was helping there for 3 months in their home with the elderly. And the special part about that is, was that these elderly people are all former Germans, like Jewish people that had lived before the World War II, during World War II, some of them in Germany, and then escaped during the Holocaust, and now had resettled, for, the past 40 years at that point, or 50 years, had resettled in Israel, had started to help build that nation. And so here I was, this young 21-year-old German who got to,
This is brilliant. This is crazy. I don't even know the rest of the story, Hanna, but to think of somebody who thought of connecting those. I just feel that in my gut, my heart, my gut, everywhere. That's profound.
Yeah, it's an organization who has done that for many, many decades. My older cousin, she had done it years before. And I kind of knew going into it that it would be, it would be uncomfortable.
Wow.
Because I went knowing a lot about the Holocaust, a lot about World War II. We, as Germans, we really get educated really well on that. But I never really met a lot of Holocaust survivors. Because at that point, it was 15 years ago, but people were already pretty old who had survived the Holocaust. So so I was kind of like, okay, let's see how this will gonna be. And I went in, young and naive and excited, but also very open-handed, and we're like, I think overall I was just, from the first day, I was like, thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me come here. And so the lady who oversaw, like the leader, the director of the elderly home, because usually, all I did was truly be there and kind of assist alongside and hand out breakfast and check on people and kind of entertain them, like help, the play therapist to play with them and all this stuff. So I didn't have any big responsibility. And she was, from the get-go, she was like, hey, thank you so much for being here. Anyone I met in Israel was so grateful for me visiting. First of all, let me say that. Like, where I came in and was like, wow, I'm sorry I'm German. I'm sorry about the history of Germany. Like, I'm sure you don't want to really interact with Germans.
Wow.
Wherever I went in Israel, people were like, wow, no, we actually glad you're here, and you you getting your own picture of us, like your own, you're getting to know us. You want to get to know our culture and our country and our nation. And so that was the first big takeaway, that wherever I went, people were like, thank you for coming and visiting.
Wow. Hanna, can I back up for just a second? You felt apologetic for just being German in that context. Is that what I'm hearing? It's actually a good summary of what I felt initially, that I almost, like, from the first, because, so I arrived in Israel my first time ever, as a Christian growing up, the Bible, it was fascinating kind of, being in the country, but also from the first week was kind of a week of orientation, and they took us to, one of the first days, they took us to Yad Vashem, which is the huge, beautifully done, but so sad museum that summarizes the Holocaust and kind of just really highlights everything that happened, unfolded, and and shows all this, people and pictures. And but here, so you need to understand, like, so this museum where like thousands of tourists and people go through every day, here I go through it
on my second day or so in the country. And as a German, you walk through Holocaust museums and you don't need the translation that is given with the pictures, you know, because there's pictures showing a German concentration camp, and then it will say like on this sign, it, you know, in English, it will explain like on this sign, this is what it says. But you as a German, you don't need that. Like you can actually read. And so that brings the message home, like, these are my people. Like these are my people that did that. And to add another layer here in this conversation, I knew going into this experience that my grandparents had been supporters of Hitler.
Wow. Wow.
I don't know a lot about that season and time and generation. I only got to really know one grandma of mine. And there's not a lot of, you know, stories in our family that they were the, I don't know, the biggest Nazis, but I also know that they were part of it because there is no other stories known that they resisted or that they, you know, they were not part of it. So.
Yes. Wow. So you're going in with this part of your heritage in mind, let alone just being German. You also knew that grandparents were at best not resistant.
Right. And okay, and then back to the apologetic piece. So I, like my first few days and going through this museum and then meeting the elderly people in the home, like I felt so like the spirit of like, I just want to apologize. I just want to like say so. And I also though at the same time, it's not up to, like, I cannot apologize for something I can do differently and I can be aware of it, but like, it was not me, you know, that was alive at that time. So I was fascinating because I realized like me apologizing doesn't help anyone because it's not me who did it, but it's also at the same time something I will carry forever as part of my German identity and German history. And and then I think going forward, I was just like, I kept pursuing kind of relationship and conversations with people, trying to learn, just trying to get to know them. And in that way, kind of, you know, I think the tendency is so quickly that you or anyone in this kind of situation wants to apologize. And I don't think that is truly changing anything, especially if you're not the one who did it.
Right.
But I think what was so much stronger and better was actually like sitting for these 3 months, like day after day after day with my grandmas and grandpas around me, and just kept like showing up and reading stories and interacting and smiling and laughing together and showing like with my very strong German accent in my English that I'm here. That
you care and you love them and you're connecting and seeing them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I can just feel that tension, Hanna. And I'm certainly going to ask you questions later, but clearly this is a mirror of some stuff going on in our culture right now. Yeah. You know, a mirror of apology and, oh dear, what's my role? But I didn't do this or whatever. And wow, there's just all kinds of layers to this story that are amazing.
Yeah. And then I think it got even, so the director of the home was like, hey, you know, just show up, just be here, just be kind and giving and just love on them. And then, and be professional about it. And then she said like some of them actually know German and could speak German still, but it's up to them if they will open up and want to speak German. And so so the weeks go by and one lady that I really adored the most, she was this sweet, very, very old lady already. Like, I mean, sitting in a wheelchair, like she was very fragile, and maybe because she was sitting in a wheelchair and because of my sister, I just adored her especially. But she had always this little smile in her face, and like I think you could see that even with her for like, you know, like old age, she still had this like, she was someone to joke around quickly and just be funny. And so I loved like sitting with her and interacting with her. And she would speak English for the whole time until like maybe, you know, pretty much till the end. She opened up a little bit to me. And she started like, I don't know really how it came along, but anyway, she started speaking German to me.
Mm.
That was significant. I mean, responding in German to me, and that was significant because of two things. Because as she was speaking German to me, I realized she had my German dialect. Like she must have grown up and come from the area where I'm from because of her,
Wow.
the way she spoke and her dialect.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of was like, oh, wow. Like I mean, because it's such a distinct dialect, like I was like, wow. And it's, again, Southern Germany, very rural, small villages. I was like, that's so random. And so I ended up getting to know a little bit more of her story at that point. And, again, the beauty of relationship and someone trusting you with their story.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And she ended up telling me like that when when Hitler came into office and the whole Holocaust and Second World War started unfolding, she was dating this boy. I think it was her first boyfriend. She was like 17, 18 years old. And this boyfriend was very clearly so very critically what was happening with Hitler, and was kind of like saying like, I think this is getting worse. It's getting worse. We should, get out of here. I don't think it's going to be, good. And she said her parents though were very like, no, we don't believe that. Like, we're not gonna, we're not trying to get away. Like, we're gonna sit it out and we'll be fine. And so against the will of her parents, she ended up running away with her boyfriend and believing him and just, being in love and following him as he was like, I'm getting out of here. I think this is going to be bad. And she never saw her parents and her siblings again.
Oh my goodness.
And here she is telling me the story in German in my dialect. And I'm like, on the other side, they were most likely, my grandparents, my people from that area, region of Germany. And so it was,
wow.
I mean, and for a lot of reasons, those 3 months in Israel were really, really, really hard.
Yes.
Because I think they were emotionally so filled with so many highs and lows.
Yes.
But I was like, over the last 3 months, and I kept hearing people like here in the US kind of processing through this racial uprising and the conversations and Black Lives Matter. And like, I kept hearing kind of like from my white friends, like, oh, it's kind of uncomfortable. Like, I kept thinking back to my time in Israel and other, conversations since then of our German history. And I'm like,
yes,
being uncomfortable is not a good enough reason to not, standing in this and pursuing it.
Hanna, what did that discomfort, you embracing that discomfort, how did that change you after Israel?
I mean, I think another, and maybe the last piece of this Israel's, like of my story as part of telling you about the story of Israel, my time there, is that you also need to know that being part of the Jewish community there and living there for 3 months meant that I was invited into the Sabbath celebrations on Friday, when the whole country really it's fascinating to watch how the whole country shuts down by Friday afternoon, and then they sit together around a table as families. And it's almost like you have a Christmas kind of dinner or a Thanksgiving kind of dinner, like every Friday afternoon, evening, because everything is shut down and your friends come over if they don't have their own families. And it's truly just like once a week you have the Thanksgiving celebration. And this beauty of that, like their unity and their kind of celebration of the mother in the household and the father and the kids, and kind of everyone has their little lighting the candles and doing this and reading scripture. And there was such a deep identity for them in who they were. And it was so hospitable and so meaningful and beautiful. So to this day, sometimes when I start a meal, I'm remembering the way Jewish people see it, and how they're not really praying that God blesses the food, but they feel like just already having a table with a meal in front of you is already a blessing in itself, that God has already provided all this. And anyway, so I think that's another part of this piece of my time in Israel, that I came home so much richer in having gotten to know a whole different culture, and a beautiful culture, and a culture that in some ways I don't understand to this day because they are different than me. But I think when I came, Israel changed me because I got to know myself better.
Mm.
And I think I brought a bigger openness to myself and to others, saying like, and to sit in the discomfort. I think to also sit with emotions and say like, this is okay. This is, I don't even want to say really hard. Like, I mean, the Holocaust survivors, what they have gone through, I cannot even comprehend. I cannot, and I will never. But I felt so blessed of being, there for the day to day and the mundane things and getting to know them and their beauty and also the uniqueness. I think like, because today hardly anyone is still alive, and so
yes,
I got to do that.
Yes, that's what struck me is we're seeing the tail end of that World War II generation pass away.
Yeah.
I mean, we're at the tail end.
Really tail end.
I mean, my grandpa was part of that, and if he was alive, he'd be I think 97. And so it's like and so you got that. Yeah, you used the word rich, and that was the word that kept coming to my mind as you were talking. This rich. Yes. Was it difficult? Yes. Was it uncomfortable? Yes. And the wealth that you gained through that is, and I love the fact you just said that, about even our experiences now as white Americans to say, you can sit with the discomfort.
And that's fascinating. I think, I mean, for me back then, it felt like it was this the season I got to experience, like I went into it saying like, I really felt like I needed this foreign exposure. I needed to like overcome my insecurities towards English. I needed to just do that. So I don't even want to say like, looking back, there were all these grand reasons, like that and then I was there and I was like, oh wow. I mean, I kind of, I learned, I mean, there was so much more. I mean, I think of all the countries I could have picked, I think cross-culturally, that might have been one of the most, just because of our histories and, the very tender relational piece in there.
Yes.
So I ended up in a context that was, way more than what I realized. But now today, like when we say, about the question, like, where do you see your story come full circle?
Yes.
I think, and I'm so grateful for many, many reasons for this season, but especially also nowadays living in the US and how much that story back then informs now how I think today, how I hear certain statements, how I stand with people on the margin, because how could I not? And, and also like just keep talking about it and saying like, it's okay to be uncomfortable, but especially as the person of privilege, be humble in that. Like it's not for me to, to force people to share their story. It's for me to keep showing up and saying like, I'm here.
Right.
Like, whenever you want to share that, like with the, old lady in the wheelchair that shared her story in the end with me. It was not that was the end goal, but it was one of the things I will never forget that she did.
Oh, it was a crowning moment for you. It was such a gift from her to you to let you in. And so many amazing things, Hanna. That's just beautiful. Beautiful. Oh my goodness. And I guess I'm curious, and maybe you've already addressed this as maybe one of the final questions, Hanna, is why did you choose to tell this part of your story today?
I honestly have not really talked much about it ever.
Wow.
I mean, I think initially in the season, when I was there the 3 months and like the few following time, then going into college and studying actually theology, learning Hebrew and so on, it was more on the forefront, but it was kind of more from in Germany. What you need to understand is we all in our own way have more or less have these kind of stories, like just of really wrestling with our history and the history of our grandparents or my parents' generation of their parents. And And to this day, I mean, there is a lot of, my parents' generation I realize now that they are processing in some way through having had parents that went through a world war but also kind of, followed Hitler and were so devastated afterwards. And so I think as a whole nation, we've like carried that. But then kind of like after my, after year, went by, I kind of like, it was just, so many new stories and parts of my story kept happening and chapters opened up. And so anyway, I think I've never really talked about this in the US. And now this last few weeks and months, I was like, man, with everything we're talking about and discussing what's happening, I'm like, I see so many things where I was like, I think the first thing that brought it home was like when someone said, oh, this is really uncomfortable. And I'm like, that doesn't mean it's bad, so, and I think that got started and then kept talking. And I think that's why I wanted to share it, because I've been thinking a lot about that time. This may be a little sappy, but as you're telling this story, I literally can see this being a movie. I mean, this confluence, this connection of this woman's story and it makes me teary thinking about it, late in her life, and you, and there being this beautifully redemptive interaction and connection, and the fact you're using the same dialect from your small little area of Germany. Crazy. I mean, literally, I'm like, this is a movie. Oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. And not that it needs to be a movie, but you know what I'm saying? It is an absolutely profound part of your story, Hanna, and I'm really shocked that you haven't talked about it more. And I'm thrilled that we did it Thank
today.
You for listening. Yeah. But I think it's also the concept of our life that there is, there is so many more pieces and stories that almost in similar ways would make a good movie, because that's kind of life. I think that's why you and I got started talking originally in this, we miss hearing people's stories from, our Cascade community. And so, I think so in that way, I totally agree. But also I feel like, there's 5 more stories I could tell you that also had, and I think similar for you. And I truly believe that's when I get to know new people. I'm like,
all of us.
I know that there's stories, especially the stories of redemption and the stories of change and the stories that really made us who we are.
Yes, and transform us. Beautiful. Oh, Hanna, thank you a million times over. We are so grateful for you, for this story. And I know this is going to be just a really delightful and inspiring story for people to hear. So with that, I want all of you listening to remember your story matters. We all have stories that inspire and can be celebrated. And I'm going to leave you with this. Who needs to hear your story?